Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to recommend to you 12 different LGBTQ plus books in honour of Pride Month. So these are all books which I have rated very, very highly and I would recommend to anyone and everyone. So we have non-fiction, we have fiction, we have short stories and we have some YA. We'll kick off with the non-fiction. First is one that I read relatively recently, and it's None of the Above by Travis Alabanza. So Travis is black and genderqueer, and this non-fiction looks at, Travis takes 7 different phrases or sentences that people have said to them throughout their life, some positive, some negative. And those 7 sentences are the framework for the book. So Travis examines each of these sentences, the impact that it has had on them and what it says about society at large. I found this book really, really fascinating, very, very interesting. There's a lot of discussion around non-binary identities, what that means, and also it explores the way that Travis talks about how being non-binary, being genderqueer, they have to define themselves as such because the wider society demands them sort of to label themselves, if you like. I thought it was a fascinating non-fiction and I would highly recommend it. And the next non-fiction I want to recommend is Ace, Voices by Eris Young. So this is a book I read, I think towards the start of the year. I had this on NetGalley. The subtitle is What It Means to Be Asexual, Aromantic, Demi or Grey Ace. This was a really, really informative non-fiction book, all about the whole sort of spectrum of ace identities. I learned a lot from the book. There was so much that I was quite ignorant about actually. I didn't have an understanding before reading the book about the sort of intricacies of different ace identities. It's told in a very accessible, informative way. It also contains sort of reflection pieces asking the reader sort of to reflect on different things each chapter, which makes you sort of really interact with the book. Another one I would highly recommend. Moving on to the fiction now, and we have a classic, Maurice by Forster, or you might pronounce this Maurice depending on where you are in the world. So Maurice was first written in the early 20th century. It wasn't published until I think the 70s after Forster's death, and that is because it is about a gay man, Maurice. So this is a coming of age story. We follow sort of Maurice as he grows up, his time at school when he is, I guess, questioning his sexuality at a time when obviously you couldn't be gay. He goes to university, he goes to Cambridge University, and he sort of comes to understand more about his own identity. It's a really wonderful book. It's one that I am planning on rereading, and for a queer classic, it is quite joyful as well. I couldn't do this video without mentioning Sarah Waters, and today I want to recommend Affinity. Not only is Affinity my favourite Sarah Waters novel, it's my favourite novel, full stop. This is set in a Victorian women's prison. We follow Margaret, who is quite a well-off lady who goes visiting in the prison as sort of like a befriender, and she meets Selena, who is one of the prisoners there. Selena is said to be a spiritualist, and there is great doubt throughout the book as to whether or not her claims of being a real spiritualist are true or false. The book is told in diary entries, largely from Margaret's perspective, but also we do get some entries from Selena as well. It's a very claustrophobic novel with the setting of the prison. As it is diary entries, it is told in first person, which I really love. Out of all of Sarah Waters' novels, I would say it's probably her gloomiest novel. So if you like yourself a miserable book, then this is definitely one for you. I love everything about this book. I've read this twice now. it's one I'm going to reread and reread again and again in future. I love the writing, the plot, the characters. Everything about this book to me is perfect. The next book I want to recommend is The Death of Vivek OG by Akwaeke Emezi. This I read a couple of years ago, and it is one of the few books that really made me cry. And when I say made me cry, it made me sob. I thought this was a really, really sort of heartbreaking book, but also a really wonderful book as well. The book opens with Vivek's mother finding the body of Vivek outside the front door, naked, wrapped in a sheet or a blanket. And then the story is about what happened as we find out what caused Vivek's death. It is quite a short novel. It is, I guess, tragic, as you can tell, because of the title of the book. It looks at identity, sexuality, belonging, family and friendship, and it's a really, really wonderful book. In Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo, we follow 74-year-old Barrington, who is of Antiguan origin, living in London. He has been married to his wife for many decades, and he has also been in a relationship with one of his best friends, who is a man. This is a really, really wonderful book. The book looks at the Caribbean community in London and sort of the expectations of society, and we see Barrington sort of struggling to make really important decisions about his life, about his relationships. It is a book that is quite funny in parts, and it is another one that I think contains a lot of joy. And I have just heard this is being made into a TV series by BBC, which is interesting. Next is Here Again Now by Okechukwu and Nzelu. In this book we follow Chike, who is a young black man living in London, and it is about the relationship he has with his father, who moves in with him, and Chike's sort of developing relationship with one of his best friends. It's about the relationships between those three men. We have a tragic incident that occurs during the book, and it's about how they react to that and how it changes the relationships between them. This is a book I read a couple of years ago and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was really, really well written, and I would highly recommend. Next is Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. This is a strange book. This is one that I definitely want to reread because I definitely didn't totally understand everything in this book, but I absolutely loved it. So it almost reads a little bit like interconnected short stories, but it's not. It is a novel, and each chapter takes a different sort of philosophical concept. The main characters are this couple called Rachel and Eliza, and one day Rachel wakes up and tells Eliza that she thinks an ant has got in through her eye and is living in her brain. So that sort of gives you an idea of the weirdness of the book. It explores many sort of philosophical concepts. It's quite strange. It's told, I guess, kind of in vignettes with overlapping elements. I am going to be rereading this hopefully sort of in the near future. When I say in the near future, that generally means like in the next year or so. But I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. So if you're looking for something a little bit strange, this might be for you. My next recommendation is Box Hill by Adam Mars Jones. This is a book that I wasn't sure what I was going to think of it, but I absolutely loved it. We follow Colin, who is a young gay man who meets Ray, who is an older biker. They meet at Box Hill and they develop a relationship which is a dom-sub relationship. It makes for quite uncomfortable reading at times, I would say. But it's so well written, and you are so sort of drawn to the character of Colin and the relationship between these two men. And it explores sort of issues around, I guess, self-esteem and consent. It's excellent. My next recommendation is a short story collection, and that is Salt Slow by Julia Armfield, who is the author of Our Wives Under the Sea, which I do also recommend. This short story collection is gothic, sort of weird, sort of creeping horror type stuff, and it's queer as well. If you have read and enjoyed Our Wives Under the Sea, then this sort of, which was written first, has glimpses of certain elements that are in that novel. My favourite story from this collection is called The Great Awake, and it's about, there's this sort of pandemic, I guess, where people are become insomniacs, and their insomnia is manifested in a physical form. So what's called their sleep follows the person around through their everyday life as they are, you know, trying to carry on but physically exhausted because they haven't slept. And this sort of embodiment of their sleep is following them around. That was my personal favourite, but I really loved all these stories. And then to finish with, we have a couple of YA recommendations. First is The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar. So this follows Nishat, who is a young Bangladeshi teenager who at the start of the book comes out to her parents as lesbian. Her parents are very religious, they are Muslim, and they do not approve of this, largely I think because of the way that they are worried what other people will think, what their wider family will think, what society will think. Nishat goes to school, and we see the bullying she experiences. The book also looks in a really sort of sensitive and accessible way at cultural appropriation. I thought that was a really, really good element of the book. And Nishat does have a potential love interest at school, and we follow their relationship as well. This was one that I really, really loved. It's a YA book, but it contains so many really important and interesting themes. So I would highly recommend it. And then my final recommendation is another YA. This is The Passing Playbook by Isaac Fitzsimmons. In The Passing Playbook, we follow 15-year-old Spencer, who is a trans boy. He has just moved to a new school because he was experiencing bullying at his previous school. At his new school, he hasn't come out to them as being trans. He is really into soccer and joins the soccer team until one day a law comes into force, which means that the soccer coach ends up taking Spencer off the team. And it's about the fallout of that. There is also a love interest in this book as well, another boy that Spencer likes. This is one that I read a couple of years ago, and I thought it was a really, really wonderful YA book, looking again at some really important themes. It was really well written with great characters, and I would highly recommend. So those are my 12 recommendations for you this Pride Month. Please do let me know what books you'll be reading this month, if you'll be reading any LGBTQ plus books, and let me know if you have any recommendations for me. Thanks for watching, and speak to you soon.